Muchas gracias, señoras y señores. Como les indiqué al inicio, hay unas fichas que lucen como esto que fueron entregadas al inicio para que por favor nos pasen sus preguntas. Tenemos dos compañeras de la Fundación que nos van a estar ayudando a recoger estas preguntas. Las vamos a leer y después procederemos a escuchar la respuesta del profesor Unwin. Aquí tengo algunas otras preguntas. Vamos a empezar por dos preguntas que tenemos aquí inicialmente. Y están en inglés, así que las voy a leer en inglés y se van a traducir inmediatamente. Do you have an example of partnership that actually works?
Que funcionen.
Yeah, we're sitting in one.
Sí, aquí estamos en una.
No, I do. I have some examples. When we did the Partnerships for Education program, and it shows, I think one of the sadnesses of this, we brought together lots of examples of activities that were reasonably successful. We published it on a website. I actually bought the Partnerships for Education domain name and I left it to the organisation when we left, and none of that is available. Our knowledge bank we created for Infundo, a government department, lost, and so all of that data, 3 years' work, disappeared. I say that because there are examples out there, but how we find them and learn from them is really difficult. I think that question also begs a question of how do you define what works? I don't know any partnerships, any multi-stakeholder partnerships that have systematically transformed an entire education system. Some of you may know the work of the Qatar Foundation in the World Innovation Summit for Education held every year, which highlights 6 awards for each year for projects that have been innovative in education, and very many of these use ICTs. So if you want to go, look at the wiseqatar.org site, because there are lots of examples there of pilot projects that are reasonably successful. So I think I would certainly, I use this foundation's work as an example, but I know that the foundation itself is only part way on a journey. I think there is some quite exciting work with disabilities groups in my own country. I think some of the work that's been done in bringing the private sector and civil society together with governments in actually driving accessible software for everybody in educational programs is important, but it's scratching the surface, and I think we have to ask in many cases where people talk about partnerships, could a contractual relationship have done it better? And nobody does that counterfactual. I actually think that contractual relationships can be very, very much more cost effective. But what you do, if you're just after value for money, they almost certainly are. But in terms of the other added value, the intangibles, the fact that the gentleman got to know the ministers and was able to sell his products across the market, for him that was a great success. For me, it wasn't. So I do think that so far we haven't shared enough good practice. Too many people are reinventing the wheel. Too many people are making the same mistakes. But the foundation here would be certainly one model that I would wish to draw other people's attention to.
El mensaje es que no todas las alianzas deben convertirse en alianzas, ¿verdad? Hay algunas alianzas que posiblemente vayan a funcionar mejor con otros tipos de arreglos entre los participantes. Aquí tenemos una pregunta que se refiere más al caso de Costa Rica. También la voy a leer en inglés porque está en inglés y ustedes van a recibir la traducción. What are the challenges that Costa Rica should focus the most in the middle term? Connectivity, educational content, delivering equipment, any other?
Yeah, all of them. Hey, that's a totally unfair question because I always say I'm here to learn from you, and I do think it's terrible when people. Forgive me, whoever asked that question. It's of course not terrible. It's totally fair. But you know, expecting somebody coming from outside, particularly when they've said that local context matters. Humbly, I would like to decline that question, but with respect, I won't, and I will give some answers. I think certainly one of the logics of my argument here has been we must ensure equality of access to connectivity for everybody. And if this technology does have an impact on education, it is totally unfair that not everybody has access to it. The people who need that access most are the poorest and the most marginalized. They're not those who already have a privileged education. And so I think connectivity is absolutely essential. There's a debate around content. I have good friends who actually say that kids can find all the content they need on the web, so you don't need to develop new content. There's actually so much content out there, so much available for free, that perhaps we shouldn't be developing new content. And I actually think this kit, it's called Information and Communication Technologies. So we tend to focus on the information and the content and forget the communication. Actually, what this enables is completely new, very different methods of communicating and interacting. So for whoever it was who said content, yes, but let's match that with communication. And I think in education, there's one other aspect as well, which is, and we could talk about this for hours and perhaps have your feedback, but there is so much information out there. How do you know what is good and what is bad information? I think as a university professor, many universities in many countries of the world still remain about learning and regurgitating. They should be about helping young people to think for themselves and come up with new, exciting ideas. To my chagrin, too many universities have forgotten that mission. Therefore, the most important thing we can help our students with at school or at university is actually to discern useful information and less useful information. It's that ability to discriminate and not just to cut and paste Wikipedia. So I would add that to the list. There were a couple of other things. Yes. I haven't got. What were the other? It was infrastructure, content,
equipment, connectivity, educational content, delivering equipment.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, I have a couple, tengo un par de preguntas adicionales. Esta viene de Paul Furboy, representando a Camtech. Can you speak of examples of partnerships for information technology research and development between academia and private sector? How can Costa Rica start effectively?
Yeah, I actually think that there are quite a lot of small-scale initiatives, and maybe just from some of the things that our university has worked on. We created in 2004 a research group focusing very much on how the best research could be done in the interest of the poorest and the most marginalized people, and we found that there were many private sector companies who were actually interested in developing that agenda. Things like, particularly in the field of monitoring and evaluation, developing a series of monitoring and evaluation programs, because the private sector was interested systemically in doing that better, so they could show governments and donors that actually, yes, our kit works. The trouble is when, of course, that research shows the opposite. So you have to have quite tight contracts there. I think there are examples where bringing groups of young people with different skills and abilities across the world to work together to solve problems. I think, as some of you may be familiar with Engineers Without Borders, I actually think some of the work that the universities do in supporting those, providing they're not too top-down, which some of them are, but there's some really, I mean, let me give you a case study. University of Pennsylvania, there's the Dean of Engineering there, Joe Sun, for many years brought groups of really able US engineers to work, not just to deliver something for other people, but to work on the ground with some private sector companies, but also with communities to deliver and create digital communities and sharing that expertise with young people in the countries themselves. I think that sort of thing is really effective. However, yeah, just a couple of examples there. However, I think far too often, and I'm choosing my words quite carefully here, far too often the requirements placed on academics by the structures in which they operate actually prevent them engaging in innovative, exciting activities that will make a difference to the world in which we all live. That they have to deliver on certain agendas which mean that apart from anything else, they just don't have the time. If they're busy doing research and teaching, universities don't give credit for practical activities with the private sector, unless, I was ignoring sort of high-level research, which is done collaboratively, jointly sponsored by governments and industry. I didn't think that was what the question was about. And it's very brave to step outside that. You would not advise a young academic ever to do that. It is completely not an issue. Certainly not working for the poorest and the most marginalized.
Esta pregunta está en español, entonces la vamos a traducir aquí con el servicio de traducción. ¿Ya? Estados débiles y corruptos. Empresas igualmente corruptas dejan en su relación de contratos disfrazados de alianzas generacionales aún más marginadas, excluidas, incapacitadas de acceder a la tecnología como medio de desarrollo. ¿Cuál sería, a su parecer, el rol del Estado y la participación ciudadana en esta realidad? Es una pregunta de Julio César Holloway.
That's a fantastic question, and I will tackle it head on, even though I work for an international organization that works very closely with governments. I think the word corruption is a word many of us use to describe a system we don't properly understand. I think the word corruption is often something that we use to say, you don't do it our way, therefore you are wrong. And different societies have different norms and expectations. And I think we need to understand those. That having been said, there are clear examples of cases where, by any stretch of the imagination, things don't go right. I remember I was working in one African country trying to help them craft a huge multi-stakeholder partnership for education. I thought we had most of the stakeholders there and the players. Halfway through a week-long meeting, I discovered that another global initiative was trying to get another minister to accept a large number of free computers in the organization. But I also discovered later that in that country the permanent secretary had been taking a slice of the cost of every computer that came into every school in the country, and the government found out about that, and his life was very different afterwards. So there are these things that happen. I think actually one of the solutions is understanding, and for example, let me share sort of some of the work that the CTO is beginning to do in that space. Very often companies from very different parts of the world with very different practices get jealous of each other's successes, but that's because they don't speak to each other. That's because they don't speak and understand the government that's caught in the middle. If one, I'm trying to be very discreet, but let's say there are companies that operate according to all our normal Western rules and contribute a lot to the CSR of a country, and may then be surprised that when they bid for a tender, and companies that operate less carefully or offer incentives get the contracts, and that causes a lot of difficulty. We're in a privileged position where we work with many different governments, we work with many different kinds of company, and it's very clear that some companies do not understand, however much they profess they do, the ways that some of these governments work. And so actually coming together, working in closed doors meetings, sharing experiences and understandings, because we're a trusted partner in the middle, we can broker those very delicate discussions. So I think that's one way. The second way is obviously, as the question I think alluded to, civil society plays a key role in holding governments and private sector to challenge and bringing these issues to the fore. In what I said, it's very clear, although it was implicit, so let me be more explicit. There's a huge amount of money involved in ICT and education, huge amounts. Many of the biggest global corporations are driving this agenda. They are very, very powerful, and civil society has to stand up. And as I said in one of the final, having the right checks and balances in place to ensure that the interests of the poorest and the marginalised are not forgotten. But again, if huge profits are made and yet the life of that young girl is improved, that's what I haven't resolved in my own mind. Is that necessarily wrong? I'm sure the ambassador won't mind me saying, but in our own country, the difference between the rich and the poor in terms of incomes is now greater than it has been at any time since the 1920s. And that isn't just true of my own country, it's true of many other parts of the world. And we're all responsible for that. All of us, everyone in this room. And we have to fight. That's probably not the best word. We have to work collaboratively together, I believe, to serve the interests of the poorest and the most marginalised. Because if we don't, we're the ones who will suffer in the end. And civil society is hugely important in that. I've rambled a bit in answering that question. That you touch on very difficult issues, but by being open, being transparent, working collaboratively, I do think that's a way forward. And Costa Rica, you have a strong tradition of democracy that goes back to your very foundation. Please never lose that and help others of us in different parts of the world learn from you as we've done with the foundation.
Here is a last question, and that it's going to touch on some of the issues that you mentioned about interest. How is it possible to balance the private interest in private-public partnerships and multi-stakeholder partnerships when speaking about common interest initiatives, such as ICT for development and education?
I think I said that wasn't easy to do, but I do believe it is possible. I think the answer, and I know I rushed through the slides and I apologize. There's so much I wanted to share with you. The answer's part in that matrix that I showed: supply, demand, contributions and expectations. And that's where the trick lies. It's actually firstly beginning with identifying what the educational solutions you want really are. It isn't beginning with, we're a group of partners who want to work together. It's somebody, maybe that broker, maybe government, maybe enlightened private sector, maybe a civil society saying, we have a need. We have a need. Who do we need to resolve that need? And I tried to say that I do think we need people from all sectors. We need the technical expertise of companies. We need the commitment and the tax revenue of the state to fund education. We need parents and teachers and young people and teachers' unions and civil society organisations who are going to be the people who actually often deliver this, to come together and to accept that the contributions and what every individual organisation will also take out, they won't be equal. What a parents' organisation can contribute as compared with, in monetary terms, with the global corporation like Microsoft, Cisco or Intel, completely different. But without that parents' association group in the partnership mix, it may not work. So in a sense, everybody is equally valuable because they're essential to making the output work. So begin with very, very clear educational aims and objectives, bring together the right partners, spend time with each other, really understanding your interests, building that trust, building that openness, building that honesty. And that takes a huge amount of time. I think academics can come in maybe with having a really, really good baseline study there that you can know what you're building on. I think those are the sorts of things you need to have in place. I would add to it, you have to be there for the long term. And again, that's where I think international organisations such as my own have a key role to play, because we've been around for 111 years or whatever it is, and we have no intention of going away soon. Governments get re-elected, CEOs of global corporations change. One of the most damaging things for partnerships is when a charismatic leader goes to another job, steps aside, and invariably they fail. So you've got to have those structures in place. But I think in education, more than in health or in many other areas, these partnerships only work if people are committed for the long term. And I think globally, and I'll have to ask me another question so I can finish on a positive note, but globally, education seems to be an arena that everybody says is important, but people don't put enough effort, energy and attention into delivering. And certainly that's a challenge UNESCO faces. That's why the Cato Foundation set up WISE to try and champion good examples, but to bring education to the forefront. Look at, I haven't seen the ministries here, so forgive me if I cause offence, but in many countries I work in, you look at the buildings of the Ministry of Education and you look at the buildings of the Finance Ministry, and there's a slight difference. Let's get education the priority and attention it needs. And it is possible to do. That's the positive bit.
That's a positive thought. Quisiera que nos acompañen dándole un aplauso al profesor Tim Unwin por esta excelente conferencia el día de hoy.